you have to work hard, you have to contribute, you have to make sure everyone's taken care of. I just felt like that's what you had to do. When did being strong start meaning that you had to carry everything alone?
What if the reason you feel impatient, disconnected, exhausted, or emotionally checked out as a dad isn't because you're failing, but because you've been carrying too much for too long? Recent studies show that men are significantly less likely to seek mental health support, even while reporting rising issues of stress, burnout, loneliness, and emotional exhaustion. Fathers today are spending more time parenting than previous generations, while also balancing work pressure, financial strain, and the expectation to, quote, hold it together, unquote. Research also shows that men often express depression through irritability, anger, withdrawal, or overworking instead of sadness. Many dads experience silent burnout, but don't recognize it as a mental health strain. Fathers' mental health directly affects children's emotional development, confidence, and long term well being. So today, we're talking to the dad who feels overwhelmed, short tempered, disconnected, or constantly exhausted, and reminding him, you're not a bad dad, you're an overwhelmed dad. So, looking forward to chatting about this today. And Drew, how are you?
I'm good, Ed. Looking forward, as always, to these conversations. The goal is that we meet someone, maybe an overwhelmed dad, where they're at, and help them, take at least one step forward wherever they are, and to get closer towards their goals. So, it's an opportunity to come alongside somebody and be valuable in their fatherhood journey, knowing that it has significant ripple effects, I should say, beyond just them, but also their children and the broader community as whole. So,
Excellent.
how are you
Excellent.
today?
Yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. So, as always, our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believe that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. Also, we want to answer your questions about fatherhood during our show. So please, please, please send us an email at podcast@dadcentral.ca. And just to share again, we're going to be chatting about today, men's mental health matters. You're not a bad dad. You're just an overwhelmed dad. And we're going to cover some different areas today. We're going to talk about the silent weight men carry. Also, how overload shows up at home. Then you can't pour from an empty cup. I've heard that one a few times before. And then finally, reframing fatherhood. So, Drew, let's kick it off with our first section, talking about the silent weight men carry.
Yeah. When we were preparing for this conversation, I reflected back on early days when the twins were born, and then Jordan, my son, was born, and all that was going on just in life at that time. And it reminded me very much of what I was experiencing then. And it didn't feel like there was a space to talk about it. I also didn't think I had the awareness. So having this conversation is like, man, if I could have had this with myself way back then, I think it would have made a difference. It would have helped. So, in my story, I obviously had a growing family. So there's pressure to provide financially. I had, 3 kids under the age of 3. I had a partner who had just sold her business and made the decision to, be at home with the 3 kids. So I felt very responsible for everyone's, not only the providing for them, but also ensuring that the well-being of all the children and my wife at the time were taken care of. But I was also under immense, I'll say, pressure because I was placed into a new leadership role at work. It really mattered to me. I wanted to perform well. And, we also just moved. We had 2 deaths in the family within 6 months of each other. There was a lot going on. And I think what I probably experienced was what you might call functional burnout. So I was still functioning. I was at work. I was at home. I was still relatively healthy, I'd say. But in the moments when I could actually stop, I felt completely exhausted. And but I just felt like that's what you had to do. You have to work hard, you have to contribute, you have to make sure everyone's taken care of. And to me, that ultimately I learned through some hard times, but that's just really unsustainable. So, the question that a dad who's maybe experiencing something that I went through is, when did being strong start meaning that you had to carry everything alone? And that's how I felt, like I had to carry it alone. So, anyways, those are some thoughts, Ed.
Yeah, I also want to add on to that. Many dads aren't failing at fatherhood. They're operating beyond emotional capacity without recovery, support, or acknowledgement. And I think that adds on to what you just shared with our family here over the last few moments. And, some of the examples that fathers may be aware of or not aware of. Are you snapping over small things? Are you feeling emotionally numb? Are you wanting alone time constantly? Are you having exhaustion mistaken for laziness? And then finally, feeling disconnected from your partner or your kids. These are all little potential signs that can show that you know that you're carrying that silent weight. Drew, before we move on to next session, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, that was very similar to what I experienced.
Yeah.
I'm typically a high energy person. I like being active, loved going to the gym. And I found myself feeling completely exhausted and wondering why. I had to figure it out. I was like, I have literally no energy. Like I would go to work, I would take care of things at home, and then in times when you might have a normal break where I was used to getting up and doing things as well, and I literally wanted to do nothing. So for me, it showed up certainly in the physical exhaustion, which is very different than my normal state of high energy, active, doing a lot of different things. And so it's important to and I recognized at least that that wasn't my normal state, but I didn't recognize or connect it to the lack of outlets, healthy outlets, and the lack of emotional weight that I was actually carrying in the process of trying to just do it all by myself.
Good stuff. Let's move on to our next section, how overload shows up at home. Thoughts, Drew?
Yeah, well, you're usually a little more irritable, and you're usually unlikely to be able, even if you are when you're healthy, as vulnerable as you might normally feel. So, emotional shutdown or withdrawal, I think, is normal. It's a big part of that. Or you want to distract yourself. So I see, every now and then, um, a fatherhood coach on LinkedIn, and he tells about his story. And he would be present in bed reading the story, but his mind would be literally downstairs focusing on the game that he wanted to go play and the joint that he wanted to go smoke. Be, but he was still like mouthing the words to his child, and he's there physically but he's not there emotionally. His mind is on distraction. His mind is going to a place that he needs, because that was the way he could cope with what was going on. And so those are the types of things. There's also work stress that comes home, right? You cannot separate those two. Or this is one that I experienced a fair amount, is because you're less tolerant, maybe you blow up, or maybe you're frustrated. And what happens is when you don't show up the way you want to show up, is this idea of shame. Man, I should be better at this. I should be handling this much better. I'm not showing up as the dad I want to be. I feel like a bad dad. I feel like I'm failing. And that we've talked about that a couple months ago in terms of that shame versus guilt. So those are some of the things that show up at home, either externally, how we interact with our families, or internally, what we might experience in terms of some of the feelings that come up, which are unhealthy or negative and take us away from being the fathers that we want to be.
Yeah. I'll just add a question for our audience here. How many dads think they need to be perfect when their kids just really want you to be present? Think about that. Let's think about that. So, segment 3, You
Well,
can't pour
Ed,
from. Yeah,
let's
go ahead.
before we do that, let's also share, not from a place of, to make you feel bad as a dad, but children, they're highly affected by our emotional presence, not like perfection. And so the studies consistently show that emotionally available fathers positively impact their confidence, their resilience, and the emotional regulation that our kids see. And so, this is a combination of, it's healthy for us to be able to learn to process and regulate our emotions so that we can be fully present. But it's also super important and helpful for our children as they develop, because it impacts their confidence. And I think that's a really big thing. And so, a time when I was going through stress, but I'd learned some lessons on how to be present and show up for my kids, was going through the separation. And the limited time I had with my kids, I was obviously hugely stressed, had a ton of pressure, but I regulated and managed those things away from the kids, so that when I was there, I was eyes on them. My heart and mind were open to what they're going through and very focused on them. So that's the goal, that we need to unburden ourselves, so that in the moments, and even if it's just 10 minutes, we can be fully present there, because it impacts them and us.
It's good. It's good. Real good. Let's talk now about you can't pour from an empty cup. I'm sure you've heard that phrase once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Or you can't give what you don't have. So I think, if we talk about some practical strategies for dads, being able to name the stresses. So if I go back to that period of time, I named some of the stresses. So there was work pressure. I was in new leadership and I wanted to perform well. So some of that was internal pressure. Some of it was external, in terms of there was a lot actually on my plate, and a lot of a big portfolio between two cities that I was responsible for. So that was one of the stresses. Loss in the family, significant stress. A huge transition for my partner, not only becoming a parent again in terms of having a third child, but then leaving a dream business, to become a caregiver at home full time. It was for a short period of time, but still, that's a significant transition. So there was a lot of stresses, and I didn't name them at the time. I just felt I got to keep going. Just got to keep going. Just got to keep doing it. In fact, it was my boss at the time, who it had been going like this for probably 4.5 months, and she saw how hard I was working, and she's, we were talking about the next time I was going to head to Toronto, to which was part of where I was responsible for, from Kingston, and she says, maybe it's time you take your foot off the gas. And I always remember it, because I was like, it was almost like a relief for me to hear that from somebody else, because I was like, yeah, I, I got to that point where I acknowledged it. So, naming the overload, I think, is really important. And you have to just recognize, this is, a lot for me to take on right now. The other thing is, I didn't do this very well at all, is normalize asking for support, right? You need to talk about this stuff, or you need to at least let people know that you're having a difficult time, and say, um, the other thing is, these habits that you build around recovery and repair and or processing. I think this is maybe the most important, is how do you process the stresses, or the feelings that are coming up through the stresses, so that they don't actually overtake you. And so, you know, anyways, why don't you talk a little bit about this, Ed, in some ways that, because I think you're very
Yeah.
good at this, and very good at helping others identify ways to help themselves through simple habits.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. So some mental recovery habits, walking without headphones. And it's really funny these days because I don't take transit much, but when I'm driving around, I see so many people walking with headphones on, like they're blocking themselves out. But what about just getting out and just walking and just enjoy nature, or just listen to life instead of having it programmed to you? Just let enjoy a walk where you're hearing life breathe and enjoy the sounds of life. I'm very blessed to live in a neighborhood where I can go out within, if I just go outside my door, it's quiet. Even if I just walk around the block, quiet, relaxing, get all the madness out of my life. So just have that. Also a 10-minute reset after work. I'm even going to go deeper into that for those who work and all that. I'm not a proponent of having back-to-back meetings. I suggest that, if you're in a profession where you got a lot of meetings, see if you can at least take a 15-minute break in between meetings. And even after a meeting ends, relax, chill, so you can just clear your mind for what you need to get into next. Drew's a big proponent into this. Excuse me, exercise. Great way of just getting that mental recovery, you're improving yourself not only physically, but also emotionally. I think exercise is a good physical and emotional strength builder. Journalism, journalizing. I didn't know where that word came from. Better sleep boundaries. Very, very important. Sleep is key, and it's recommended by research you get at least 7 hours of sleep. Now, I know for some dads, that's easier said than done, but 7 hours is that magical key. And I could go all into the benefits of having better sleep. That may be an episode all in itself, but sleep is so key because it's a time for not only your body physically, mentally, and emotional to reform, get back up to speed after you've put it through a hard day, and having honest conversations. Do you have a go-to person that you can have that honest conversation about any topic with? So those are some suggestions of mental recovery habits. Anything else you want to add, Drew?
I think I'm just going to go back because I skipped through the support part. So, when we talk about normalizing asking for support, they can you could be talking to close friends, and I think this honest conversation piece, Ed, that you talked about, I think is so important. An honest trusted person that you can reach out to, at least one, is
Hmm.
so tremendously valuable. And if nothing else, they can just listen as you share about all that's you're carrying. Partners, obviously, if you're in a relationship, hopefully there's a good relationship that you can actually honestly and vulnerably share what you're experiencing. Obviously, if you need additional support, therapists or counselors, also fatherhood groups, there's I think a growing amount of them available, and then certainly, of course, we have our dad mentor father leader community, and if not, then coaches, right? I actually hired a coach in the midst of some of the challenges, in the home and around the family. It was also built into work as well, but having a coach or a community that you can find connection and just an opportunity to unload some of the burdens you have is tremendously valuable. So I didn't want to skip over sharing some of those specific things. So I think ultimately the final piece that we want to talk about is your kids, and we've said this before, but they don't need a perfect father. They need one who's healthy and emotionally available. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you've got to find a release valve.
Agreed. I just want to add one little point on what you're saying about coaches, therapists, etc. If you are working with an organization that has a benefits program, please check if there is money put aside to have therapy, hire a coach, etc. Because if it's there, take advantage of it. And I also want to say for our dads, fathers, and male caregivers, you don't just need therapy or coaching when things aren't going well. You also need it when things are going well.
Yeah,
Just a thought.
absolutely.
Last segment, reframing fatherhood. Your thoughts, Drew?
Yeah, ultimately, you know, asking for help is not asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. Right? Strong dads are not the ones who suppress, deny, and shut everything down. Ultimately, they're the ones who are going to break down. So, in order to demonstrate honest, effective, healthy leadership, as well as you could say strength, fathers need to really learn how to communicate well, openly, honestly, be able to regulate your emotions. You have to learn, also have to repair after mistakes. Asking for help is, again, a sign of strength, not weakness, and that'll help you begin to do the things like modeling healthier emotions for yourself and for your family. So yeah, I think that's really, we want fathers to know that if you suppress everything, you're actually setting yourself up and your family for failure eventually.
Absolutely. I'd add also to strong dads ask for help. And I know A lot of dads are hardwired to be fix it and do it all on their own. But asking for help, as Drew said, is a sign of strength. You really want to do that. And here's a question for all of us to think about: what kind of relationship do you want your kids to remember having with you? Right? And a father taking care of his mental health teaches his children that emotions are normal, stress can be managed, vulnerability is strength, and men are allowed to ask for help. Anything you want to add to that section before I do a recap, Drew?
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I wish that someone had these conversations with me when I was in the midst of what felt like the most challenging period of early fatherhood. Right, three kids under three, uh, the changes that I mentioned. I really did need help, and I wish that I knew where to go and how to ask for it sooner.
There you go. All right, so today, let's do a little recap. We covered the silent weight men carry, also how overload shows up at home. Then you can't pour from an empty cup. And then finally, reframing fatherhood. So, some takeaways from today's show: struggling does not make you a bad father, it often means you've been overloaded without support. Second point: men's mental health affects the whole family. Healthy dads create healthier homes. Then, emotional presence matters more than perfection. Kids remember connection, not flawless parenting. And then finally, asking for help is leadership. Strong fathers don't carry everything alone. So if today's episode felt personal, don't ignore that feeling. Check in with yourself. Talk to someone you trust. And remember, taking care of your mental health is part of taking care of your family. Drew, what's the resource we have for our family today?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ed. I think that the resource we're going to be promoting through this as we finish up the month of May and we head into the month of June, Men's Health Month, is our father leader community, Dad Mentor. I think that ultimately is one of the best resources we can offer, knowing that it provides support, it answers questions, it connects fathers with other fathers, and it shares stories that help normalize and help us take intentional actions in our fatherhood and in our overall health.
Good stuff. And just remember, wherever you're watching this on our YouTube channel, like, comments, we'd appreciate it. And if you're listening to this, please write a great review. We appreciate. Give us your feedback where we can do better, opportunities, etc., and provide your tips in regards to fatherhood. So as always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.